The story begins in the silence of the Arabian desert, under a canopy of stars that have guided travelers for millennia. But the journey we are tracing does not happen on the sands. It happens in the vertical realm, in a vision that would ripple outward from the heart of Mecca to the very foundations of Western literature. This is the Isra and Miraj, the night journey of the Prophet Muhammad. In the dead of night, he is awakened by the archangel Gabriel and transported to Jerusalem, from where he ascends through the seven heavens. But before the ascent, there is often a glimpse of what lies below. In the vivid, terrifying tradition of the Hadith and later mystical texts, the Prophet is shown the architecture of the afterlife. He sees Jahannam not merely as a chaotic fire, but as a structured abyss, a deep funnel-shaped pit descending into the earth, organized into 7 distinct layers, each reserved for a specific category of sinner. He sees eaters of usury with bellies so distended they cannot stand. He sees those who slandered others scratching their own faces with copper nails. He sees guardians of terrifying countenance, the Zabaniya, who oversee these torments with impassive duty. The punishment fits the crime, a principle of divine justice that feels visceral and precise. Now, hold that image in your mind, the funnel, the layers, the specific retribution, the guardians. Let us transport ourselves 600 years forward to the desk of a Florentine poet in exile. Dante Alighieri is writing his Inferno. He describes a funnel-shaped pit bored into the earth beneath Jerusalem. It is divided into 9 circles, descending deeper into sin. He sees usurers sitting on burning sand, their eyes fixed on the purses hanging from their necks. He sees sowers of discord hacked to pieces, physically split just as they split communities in life. He sees guardians, centaurs, and demons patrolling the ridges. The structural similarities are not just vague echoes, they are architectural blueprints. Both systems rely on a moral gravity where the weight of one sin pulls them to their appropriate depth. Both feature a guide who explains the sights to the living visitor. Both describe a landscape where the wind blows incessantly to punish those who were swept away by passion. For centuries, these parallels were invisible to the European eye, obscured by the fog of religious war and cultural separation. Dante was the supreme Christian poet, and his vision was assumed to be drawn purely from classical antiquity and Catholic theology. But in 1919, the intellectual ground shook. A Spanish priest and scholar named Miguel Asín Palacios published a study titled La Escatología Musulmana en la Divina Comedia, Islamic Eschatology in the Divine Comedy. Palacios laid the texts side by side. He showed that the layout of Dante's hell and the ascent of his paradise matched the accounts of the Miraj almost beat for beat. The reaction was immediate and hostile. To the guardians of the Western canon, the suggestion that the greatest epic of Christendom was structurally indebted to Islam was a heresy worse than any Dante had described. Yet the evidence lay there on the page, an uncomfortable parallel that demanded an explanation. It wasn't just a matter of similar themes, it was a matter of shared engineering. The question was no longer if they were connected, but how a medieval Italian Catholic could have possibly accessed the inner visions of Islamic mysticism. The skeptics of the early 20th century had a powerful argument: language. Dante did not read Arabic. The works of the Sufi mystics in the intricate Hadith collections describing the night journey were locked away in a script and a tongue that were alien to a poet in Tuscany. If there was a connection, there had to be a bridge, a physical place where the ink of the East could bleed into the parchment of the West. That bridge existed, not in Italy, but on the sun-baked plateau of central Spain. We must turn our gaze to Toledo in the 13th century. This was a city unlike any other in Europe. Having been recaptured by Christian forces, it remained home to a thriving population of Muslims and Jews who lived alongside their new rulers. It was a rare, lucid moment of convivencia, coexistence. Here, the air was thick with the sound of 3 languages, and the libraries were filled with the accumulated wisdom of the Islamic Golden Age. King Alfonso X, known to history as the Wise, understood that the true treasure of Toledo was not its gold, but its books. He established a school of translators, commissioning Jewish scholars to translate Arabic texts into Castilian and Latin, unlocking secrets of astronomy, medicine, and philosophy that had been lost to Europe for centuries. Deep within the archives of this translation movement lay the smoking gun. In the year 1264, King Alfonso commissioned a translation of the Kitab al-Miraj. The task fell to a doctor named Bonaventure of Siena, who translated the Arabic account of the Prophet's ladder to heaven into Latin and Old French. This book was titled Liber Scale Lahmeti, the Book of Muhammad's Ladder. Suddenly, the text was no longer sequestered in the Islamic world. It was circulating in the lingua franca of the European elite. But how did it get from a library in Spain to Dante's desk in Florence? The answer lies in the figure of Brunetto Latini. Latini was a statesman, a philosopher, and most importantly, Dante's beloved mentor and guardian. In the 1260s, Latini was sent as an ambassador to the court of Alfonso the Wise in Toledo. We know he was there. We know he stayed with the very scholars producing these translations. It is almost historically certain that Latini, a man voracious for knowledge, encountered the Book of the Ladder. When he returned to Florence, he brought with him the treasures of his travels, concepts, maps, and manuscripts. He poured this knowledge into his student, the young Dante. The timeline is perfect. The mechanism of transmission is clear. The manuscript proves that Dante did not steal his hell in an act of literary theft. Rather, he was a participant in a vast, vibrant, and interconnected Mediterranean culture. The blueprint of the Inferno traveled along the trade routes of intellect, carried by the hands of diplomats who valued wisdom regardless of the name of the god it praised. If we need final proof that Dante was aware of this debt, we need only look at how he treats the creditors. In the 4th canto of the Inferno, Dante enters Limbo. This is the first circle, a place of sorrow without torment, reserved for the virtuous pagans, those who lived righteously but lacked the grace of baptism. It is a green, illuminated citadel within the darkness, a noble castle where the greatest minds of antiquity reside. We expect to see Homer, Caesar, Socrates, and Plato. And indeed, they are there. But among the toga-clad shades of Rome and Greece, Dante places 3 figures who wear the turban and the robe of the East. He sees Saladin, the great sultan who recaptured Jerusalem from the Crusaders. Dante paces him apart, solitary and majestic, honoring him as a paragon of chivalry and kingly virtue, despite being the nemesis of Christendom. Then, sitting at the feet of the master philosopher Aristotle, Dante sees Avicenna and Averroes. Avicenna, the genius of medicine whose canon would teach European doctors for centuries, and Averroes, the great commentator, without whom the West might never have fully understood Aristotle. Their presence here is shocking. In the rigid theology of the Middle Ages, these men were infidels. By the strict dogma of the Church, they belonged in the deeper fires. Yet Dante, risking heresy, pulls them up. He grants them the same eternal status as Plato. This is not the act of a fanatical crusader. It is the act of a man who recognizes intellectual kinship. By placing them in the noble castle, Dante is acknowledging a profound truth, that the light of reason and civilization is not the exclusive property of one faith. He admits them into the elite club of his own literary ancestors. There is a silent dialogue happening in this scene. Dante places the prophet Muhammad in a much lower circle, the victim of a theological disagreement about schism, but he elevates the culture of Islam, its philosophy, its science, and its nobility to the highest pedestal a non-Christian could occupy in his worldview. The structure of his hell may be borrowed from the Miraj, but his placement of these three men is a nod of gratitude. It suggests that the Divine Comedy, often read as the ultimate fortress of Christian dogma, is actually a porous structure, built with stones hewn from Islamic quarries. It stands as a monument to a time when the Mediterranean was not a border wall, but a mirror, where East and West looked across the water and saw in the other's dreams of the afterlife a reflection of their own fears and hopes.